Here is a question that has puzzled researchers for decades. Modern medicine is more sophisticated than at any point in the entire history of our species. We have surgical procedures, pharmaceuticals, diagnostic tools, and treatment capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction just a century ago. And yet a large proportion of deaths in the United States still occur between the ages of 65 and 80 from conditions that are closely tied to lifestyle. Cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, physical frailty, cognitive decline. If medicine is this advanced, why are so many bodies beginning to fail in the decades just before 80? The answer, according to current research in evolutionary biology, is not what most people expect. And once you understand it, you will never see your own aging the same way again. Stay with me. Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Carter, and this channel exists to give adults over 60 the honest, evidence-based health information they deserve in plain language. Today we are exploring something that I believe is one of the most important and most underappreciated frameworks for understanding senior health. The idea that much of what we experience as aging is not inevitable biological decline. It is a response to a modern environment that our ancient biology was never designed to handle. Let me begin with a foundational piece of research because it sets the stage for everything we are about to discuss. Harvard evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman has spent decades studying how the human body evolved. His work has been featured extensively in Harvard Science Communications and has been corroborated by anthropological research conducted with living hunter-gatherer populations. One of his most striking observations is this. Among the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the few remaining full-time hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, physical activity levels remain remarkably stable across the lifespan. Hadza elders do not dramatically slow down with age the way Western adults do. Harvard University researchers reporting on Lieberman's findings noted that older Western adults are typically 6 to 10 times less physically active than their hunter-gatherer counterparts of the same age. And the consequences of that gap are not trivial. Research cited by Lieberman includes a long-running study of over 21,000 Harvard graduates that found regular, moderate to vigorous physical activity lowered death rates by 36% in adults aged 50 to 59 and by 50% in adults aged 70 to 84. Lieberman summarized the finding clearly. As people get older, exercise has an even greater benefit than it does in younger years. But here is the part that changes how you think about your own body. The Hadza do not exercise the way most Westerners think of exercise. They do not go to the gym. They do not follow a workout program. They simply live in an environment that requires movement all day long. Walking, carrying, preparing food, visiting others, maintaining their community. Movement is not something they schedule. It is woven into every hour of their existence. And this reveals something profound about human biology. Your body did not evolve to exercise. It evolved to move continuously throughout the day. And when it does not receive those continuous movement signals, something very specific happens, something that most people misinterpret as aging. Let us go through the 5 habits that modern life has introduced into your daily existence that your ancient biology was never prepared for. And for each one, I will tell you what the science says and what you can do differently. Habit 1. Spending most of your day sitting still. The average American adult now spends approximately 9 to 10 hours each day sitting in a chair, at a desk, in a car, at a dinner table, in front of a television. This level of prolonged stillness would have been nearly impossible for most of human evolutionary history. Here is what the research tells us happens inside the body during extended, uninterrupted sitting. Blood flow to the legs and core slows significantly. The enzymes responsible for metabolizing fat in the bloodstream become dramatically less active. Glucose regulation becomes less efficient. Muscles that are not receiving mechanical loading signals begin to reduce their protein synthesis. And bone tissue, which requires regular mechanical stress to maintain its density, receives fewer of the signals it needs to preserve its structure. These effects can begin within hours of sitting. But the more important issue is what happens when the pattern is repeated daily across months and years. The body receives a persistent signal that physical capacity is no longer required. And according to research published in the Journal of Science in Sport and Exercise, drawing on hunter-gatherer lifestyle data, the human body responds to that signal by gradually redirecting energy away from maintenance. Muscle tissue contracts. Bone density declines. Metabolic flexibility weakens. Cardiovascular efficiency slowly drops. Here is the critical insight. These processes occur gradually through midlife, but after 60, they accelerate. And what most people attribute entirely to aging is in significant part a response to the absence of movement signals. The body is not malfunctioning. It is following ancient instructions that were written for a world where movement was unavoidable. Research on hunter-gatherer populations published in the American Journal of Human Biology found that Hadza adults across the lifespan engage in significantly higher levels of moderate physical activity than American adults. U.S. adults in the study accumulated only 6 to 10 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. The Hadza accumulated far more, distributed throughout the entire day, rather than concentrated in a single session. The practical implication is not that you need to exercise harder. It is that you need to interrupt sitting more frequently. Research published in the Journal of Science in Sport and Exercise specifically recommends breaking up prolonged sitting every 30 to 60 minutes with brief movement, standing and walking to another room, climbing a short flight of stairs, a 5-minute walk around the block. These interruptions send the body the mechanical signals it requires to maintain muscle activity, metabolic flexibility, and cardiovascular function. One dedicated daily walk is valuable, but it cannot fully substitute for movement distributed throughout the entire day. The body evolved for distributed signals, not isolated sessions. Habit 2. Constant access to processed, calorie-dense foods. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, food was unpredictable. Periods of abundance alternated with periods of scarcity. The foods available were unprocessed, fiber-rich, and required significant effort to obtain and prepare. Under those conditions, the brain developed powerful reward circuits that generated strong desire for calorie-dense foods. Sweet fruits, fatty meats, starchy roots. These were rare, valuable, and worth pursuing aggressively when found. That ancient drive was a survival advantage, but it was calibrated for an environment where high-calorie food was scarce, and obtaining it required physical effort. The modern food environment has reversed both of those conditions simultaneously. Ultra-processed foods are now everywhere, engineered by food scientists to maximize palatability by combining refined carbohydrates, fats, and salt in combinations that amplify those ancient reward circuits far beyond anything our ancestors ever encountered, and obtaining them requires no physical effort whatsoever. Research published in multiple peer-reviewed journals has consistently linked high consumption of ultra-processed foods to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and all-cause mortality. A comprehensive review published in the journal Cancers in 2025 noted that the mechanisms by which ultra-processed foods harm health include chronic inflammation, insulin dysregulation, and the displacement of protective nutrients found in whole foods. After 60, this mismatch becomes particularly significant for 2 reasons. First, total daily energy expenditure tends to decline modestly with age, as muscle mass decreases and movement patterns become more sedentary. But appetite-regulating hormones do not necessarily decrease at the same rate. The result is a quiet but persistent caloric imbalance that accumulates slowly over years. Second, excess body fat in older adults is not simply a cosmetic concern. It is metabolically active tissue that releases inflammatory signals, disrupts insulin sensitivity, and places additional stress on the cardiovascular system. The research-supported guidance here is not about aggressive dieting or caloric restriction. It is about gradually reshaping the food environment in which you make daily choices. Keeping whole foods like fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and lean proteins easily accessible. Reducing the presence and visibility of ultra-processed snacks, sugary drinks, and packaged foods in your home. Not because you need extraordinary willpower, but because the ancient circuits in your brain will always respond to what is most available and most visible. Change the environment, and the decisions follow. Habit 3. Sleeping in artificial light and ignoring circadian signals. For most of human evolutionary history, every single night arrived with complete or near-complete darkness. There was no electricity. There were no screens. After sunset, the environment sent an unambiguous signal to the human nervous system. Night has begun. Rest, recover, repair. That signal triggered a cascade of biological processes. The brain's circadian clock, located in a small region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, registered the absence of light and initiated the release of melatonin. Melatonin, in turn, triggered a coordinated physiological wind-down. Body temperature dropped slightly, heart rate slowed, blood pressure began its essential nighttime decline, immune activity shifted to support cellular repair, growth hormone released to support tissue recovery. The entire system entered maintenance mode. Modern artificial lighting has fundamentally disrupted this ancient pattern. Indoor environments remain brightly lit long after sunset. Screens emit blue-spectrum light that specifically suppresses melatonin production. The brain receives light signals that it interprets as daytime, and the physiological wind-down that should begin at dusk is delayed, shortened, or disrupted entirely. Research published in JAMA Network Open in late 2025 analyzed data from over 88,000 UK biobank participants and found a clear dose-dependent association between nighttime light exposure and increased cardiovascular risk. Compared to those sleeping in the darkest environments, those exposed to the brightest nighttime light had significantly elevated risks of coronary artery disease, heart attack, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, and stroke. Harvard researchers commenting on this study noted that nighttime light exposure should now be considered a novel and modifiable cardiovascular risk factor. Beyond cardiovascular risk, disrupted sleep directly undermines metabolic health. The American Heart Association's scientific statement on sleep and cardiovascular health confirmed that sleeping fewer than 7 hours per night increases risk of atrial fibrillation, elevated blood pressure, and cardiometabolic syndrome. Research also confirms that sleep disruption raises levels of the hunger hormone ghrelin while reducing sensitivity to leptin, the hormone that signals fullness. The result is increased appetite, particularly for calorie-dense foods, the day after a disrupted night. The practical guidance is straightforward and requires no medication. Make your sleeping environment as dark as you can manage. Use blackout curtains if outdoor light enters the room. Turn off the television rather than falling asleep to it. Put your phone face down or in another room. Dim indoor lights in the hour before your intended bedtime. And commit to a consistent sleep and wake schedule 7 days a week. These are not comfort suggestions. They are evidence-based interventions for cardiovascular and metabolic health that are supported by some of the largest studies ever conducted on human sleep. Habit 4. Experiencing stress without physical resolution. The human stress response is one of the most sophisticated biological systems ever studied. When our ancestors faced a genuine physical threat, the body activated an immediate and coordinated emergency response. Adrenaline and cortisol surged into the bloodstream. Heart rate and blood pressure elevated. Blood glucose rose to supply working muscles. Attention sharpened. The entire system was mobilized for a physical response. Fight or flee, climb or defend. And critically, in the ancestral environment, that response was almost always followed by physical movement. Running, climbing, struggling, escaping. The physical exertion itself metabolized the stress hormones, restored the nervous system toward its baseline, and closed the biological loop that the threat had opened. Modern stress does not work this way. Financial pressures, health concerns, caregiving responsibilities, relationship difficulties, the relentless flow of distressing news through phones and computers. These are real stressors. They trigger genuine cortisol and adrenaline responses in the body. But they are almost never resolved through physical action. We sit with them. We lie awake with them. We carry them through days and weeks of physical stillness while the biological cascade that was designed to be resolved through movement keeps circulating. Research on the physiological consequences of chronic stress is extensive. Elevated cortisol over extended periods is associated with increased blood pressure, suppressed immune function, disrupted sleep architecture, increased abdominal fat storage, impaired glucose regulation, and accelerated arterial stiffening. A 2025 review published in Curious documented the direct connections between poor sleep quality, driven by chronic stress, and significantly elevated cardiovascular risk factors, including hypertension and cardiac arrhythmias. After 60, the body's resilience to sustained cortisol elevation declines. The same chronic stress load that a 40-year-old body might partially compensate for can have a more pronounced physiological impact in a 70-year-old body. The cardiovascular system, already managing age-related changes in arterial flexibility and blood pressure regulation, is less able to absorb the additional burden. The evidence-based approach to stress in older adults does not require meditation retreats or dramatic lifestyle overhauls. What the research supports is regular physical movement as the body's natural mechanism for completing the stress response cycle. Walking after a difficult phone call, gardening after a stressful morning, light stretching before bed after a hard day. These are not just mood-improving activities. They are physiological interventions that help metabolize the stress hormones the body has already released. Because the body evolved expecting movement to follow stress. Without it, the stress accumulates in ways the system was never designed to carry. Habit 5. Withdrawing from purpose and community contribution. This final habit is the one most often overlooked in health discussions, and it may be among the most consequential of all 5. Humans are among the most intensely social species that has ever existed. Survival for most of human evolutionary history depended not on individual capability alone, but on the integrated functioning of cooperative groups. Hunting, gathering, food preparation, childcare, conflict resolution, knowledge transmission, tool maintenance. Each of these required different skills, and different individuals contributed different strengths. Older adults in particular carried irreplaceable knowledge and experience that younger members of the group depended on. Among the Hadza and other traditional societies studied by anthropologists, older adults do not retire from community life. They shift roles, from primary hunter to experienced guide, from active gatherer to food processor and childcare provider, from new parent to grandmother whose foraging and knowledge contributions meaningfully increase the survival of younger family members. Anthropologists refer to this as the grandmother hypothesis, the documented idea that post-reproductive adults contributed enough to the survival of their communities that natural selection favored longer post-reproductive lifespans. In evolutionary terms, older adults were valuable. Their continued participation was necessary. Research on the health consequences of social disconnection and loss of purpose in older adults is substantial and consistent. A 2025 study published in PLOS One using N. Haynes data found that poor sleep patterns associated with social isolation and reduced daily structure were linked to significantly elevated risks of heart failure and myocardial infarction. Broader research on social engagement and healthy aging consistently shows that older adults who maintain meaningful roles, whether through family involvement, community service, mentorship, creative work, or any activity that creates contribution to others, maintain higher levels of daily movement, more stable daily routines, stronger cognitive engagement, and better overall health outcomes. The mechanism is not simply psychological. Purpose influences behavior at a very practical level. People who feel needed maintain schedules. They get up at consistent times. They leave the house. They interact with others. They remain physically and cognitively active in ways that send the body the signals it needs to continue maintaining its systems. When purpose withdraws abruptly, as it often does after retirement, the downstream effects can be significant. Movement decreases. Social contact narrows. Cognitive stimulation becomes less frequent, daily structure dissolves, and the body, which evolved expecting continued engagement with the world, begins receiving fewer of the signals it needs to justify maintaining its physical and cognitive resources. The practical guidance here is not to avoid retirement. It is to ensure that retirement does not mean withdrawal. Find roles that create genuine contribution, mentoring a younger person, volunteering in a cause you believe in, teaching a skill you have spent a lifetime developing, being a consistent and present resource for grandchildren or younger family members, joining organizations that require your participation and depend on your reliability. These are not merely feel-good activities. They are biological interventions that keep the ancient circuits of purpose, contribution, and engagement firing in ways that support long-term health. Let me bring all 5 habits together now, because there is a unifying thread running through every one of them. Extended uninterrupted sitting sends the body a signal that physical capacity is no longer required. Constant access to ultra-processed, calorie-dense foods activates ancient reward circuits that were calibrated for scarcity, not abundance. Sleeping in artificial light disrupts the circadian system that governs cardiovascular recovery and metabolic repair every night. Chronic stress without physical resolution leaves biological stress hormones circulating in a system that was designed for them to be cleared through movement. And loss of purpose and community contribution removes the social engagement signals that keep the brain and body mobilized and maintained. In each case, the body is not malfunctioning. It is responding exactly as evolution designed it to respond, to an environment that is radically different from the one in which it was shaped. Harvard's Daniel Lieberman has stated this directly in his research communications. We evolved to stay physically active as we age in order to activate repair and maintenance mechanisms that counter the vulnerability to disease. We never evolved to be sedentary, so those mechanisms are never fully activated when we stop moving. That is one of the most important sentences in all of senior health. Your body has repair mechanisms. They are real, they are powerful, and they are available to you right now. But they require activation. They require the signals that movement, adequate sleep, whole food, physical stress resolution, and social contribution send to your ancient biology every single day. You are not too old to send those signals. Research on adults in their 60s, 70s, and 80s consistently shows that the body remains remarkably responsive to environmental changes, even at advanced ages. Strength increases with resistance exercise, even in the 80s. Blood pressure improves with walking, even in the 70s. Sleep quality responds to consistent timing and darkness, even after decades of disruption. Cognitive function responds to social engagement and purposeful activity at every age studied. Your body is not your enemy. It is not betraying you. It is responding to the world around it the same way it always has. Give it the signals it evolved to receive, and it will respond in kind. That is not a promise from me. That is what the science says. If this video helped you see your own aging differently today, please share it with someone you care about. A friend who is convinced that decline is inevitable. A family member who retired 6 months ago and has been quietly withdrawing from activity. A parent who believes there is nothing left to be done. The evidence says otherwise, and now they can know that too. Subscribe to this channel for weekly health information verified against current science, and made specifically for adults who want to understand what is happening in their bodies and what they can genuinely do about it. Take care of yourselves. You were built for a long and capable life. Start giving your body the signals that confirm it.